Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Paul Allen Sommerfeld, and I am an elected member of the AMS Council and a senior reference specialist here in the library's music division. It is my very great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker in our joint lecture series with the American Musicological Society, Dr. Mark Pottinger. Tonight, Dr. Pottinger will be speaking on concert hall acoustics and the sonic ideal in early 20th century America, focusing on the construction of the space in which we are gathered tonight, the Coolidge Auditorium. This lecture is presented as part of the Founders' Day celebration honoring Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, who built the Coolidge Auditorium and endowed the library's concert series. We are very fortunate to have a scholar of Dr. Pottinger's caliber and expertise here to share with us some of the Coolidge Auditorium's rich history. Dr. Pottinger is a professor of music and chair of the Music and Theater Department at Manhattan College, where he founded the Sound Studies program, an area of research that is at the intersection of musicology, acoustics, audio technology, and performance studies. Winner in 2017 of the prestigious Berlin Prize from the American Academy in Berlin, Pottinger is the author of a number of publications on the music and cultural life of 19th century Europe and the contemporary listening environment. His current book project, Science and the Romantic Vision in Early 19th Century Opera, examines the natural sciences in the first half of the 19th century and their relationship to the supernatural as found in early German, Italian, and French Romantic opera. Noted for his exuberant energy and passionate conversations about the power of music, Pottinger regularly lectures for the Metropolitan Opera and their HD Live in Schools educational programming. He is currently serving as co-chief editor of Sound Studies Review, an international peer-reviewed music journal which is housed in the Music and Theater Department and supported by upper-level students in the Sound Studies program. So please welcome Dr. Pottinger.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful and gracious introduction, and it's my pleasure to be with you all here today. It's wonderful to see family, friends, colleagues, and fans of the Coolidge Auditorium. And this talk is based on material directly in the Coolidge Auditorium, the Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge Foundation Collection. So I'd like to thank the American Musicological Society and the Library of Congress for putting together this lecture. In 1895, when the young physicist Wallace Clement Sabine examined the reverberation time of a lecture hall on Harvard's campus, the science of architectural acoustics was born. Sabine's acoustical research influenced countless architects and physicists alike, including the famous New York City-based architect Charles Platt and MIT physics instructor Clifford Swann, a former student of Sabine's. Both Platt and Swann collaborated in the construction of the Coolidge Auditorium, where we are today, housed as it is still in the Thomas Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress. Opening in 1925 and dedicated to, quote, promoting the study and appreciation of music in America, this 512-seat chamber hall exemplified, when it was built, the ideal music listening environment of the interwar period in America. This was an era that rose from the horrors of World War I, when many Americans found themselves besieged by the sounds shaping modernity, be they the hustle and bustle of the automobile, offices filled with endless activity, the riveting of steel, or even the latest jazz tune thumping from a local bar. By the 1930s, several cities throughout the United States established anti-noise commissions, which encouraged local governments to pass noise abatement laws in order to counteract the increase in nervous anxiety and mental illness. Architectural acoustics then became a necessary science to counteract the ill effects of the spread of progress in America. The concert hall acoustics of the Coolidge Auditorium is a result of this societal view on the destructive impact of noise on society. It is ironic, however, that with the increase of noise abatement within building construction, early 20th century music became louder and more discordant. It was as if the composers and musicians of the day, in opposition to local government restrictions, sought to mirror in the music the noise of the modern world rather than present an escape from it. Beyond the repertoire of the musical vanguard and its ability to disrupt the acoustic control measures put in place in concert venues, the introduction of live radio broadcasts forced acousticians to adapt to a new listening paradigm that embraced the engineered sound of aural reception in the home. In 1925, 20% of American households owned a radio, but in only 5 years' time, that number increased to 40%, the doubling again in 1940 to 83%. As this March 1922 cover of Variety magazine shows, the radio was indeed sweeping the country. Live radio listening in the home had a measured effect on concert hall acoustics, changing not only American listening habits in a concert hall, but also the very sound of the music itself, a factor that still influences the design of concert halls today. Based on archival records housed here in the Library of Congress, this presentation reconstructs the listening soundscape that informed the construction and patronage of a mid-1920s concert hall before the golden age of radio, the Library of Congress's own Coolidge Auditorium. My talk today further highlights the changing attitudes in America toward acoustics, broadcast sound, and noise in the first half of the 20th century, and how listening to music produced via microphones, loudspeakers, and later headphones throughout the century continue to impact concert hall construction today. The Coolidge Auditorium, then, will be our reference point, a 1925-built sonic oasis, a separate space in the nation's capital that will underscore for us today that the concert hall is not simply a building to hear music, but an oral reflection of the political and cultural realities shaping our world. The American physicist Wallace Sabine is widely regarded as the first to turn the seemingly subjective listening experience in concert hall into a rigorous science. In 1895, he examined the reverberation time of the Fogg Lecture Hall at Harvard, pictured here, a space notoriously known for intolerable echoes and muffled speech. His work at the lecture hall gave him the opportunity to develop a mathematical formula to predict the acoustic properties of an open space in order to hear speech as well as music distinctly. Sabine's formula refers to the time in seconds required for a sound no longer to be audible, otherwise known as the reverberation time, or RT, as you see here. In regard to the rest of the formula, beyond the hyperbolic geometric constant, the variables of volume and surface area, the alpha symbol at the end represents the average absorption coefficient, or the absorbing power per unit area of material, which is referred today in Sabins, an SI unit named in Sabine's honor. In order to test this formula, Sabine developed the following apparatus of an organ pipe set at 512 hertz, or an octave above middle C, which was played on top of a large tank of compressed air. And here you see on the slide the compressed tank of air and then the organ pipe on top. Once a tone was struck on the organ pipe and armed only with his ear and a stopwatch, Sabine would measure how long the tone was no longer audible to his ear and then write down the results. After several repeated hearings, he would then minimize any variation in his measurements by calculating the mean value of each set of numbers. As seat cushions and other material were systematically added to the lecture hall, Sabine was able to calculate the rate of sound absorption of each added item as heard by his ear. Through the mind-numbing, exhaustive experimentation of Sabine, the reverberation formula came into view. The formula established Sabine as the expert on acoustics in America and set in motion the use of science and technology to define our listening habits in an enclosed space. Following the acoustical work at Harvard, Sabine was soon asked to construct the acoustical environment of private and public spaces around the country, most notably Symphony Hall in Boston. The rectangular shape of Symphony Hall represented for the early 20th century the ideal concert hall design in America, which reflected a classic European past. You'll note in the image the Italian Renaissance Revival style interior with the coffered ceiling and the Grecian column reliefs and statues on the sides of the hall. And here, just pointing out, you see the statues and the Grecian columns, and even the proscenium, sort of reflective of sort of a Baroque style in the coffered ceiling, all reflective of a European past. The design of the hall and the materials used for the interior, which included unvarnished wood, plaster, wool seat coverings, and wool curtains, were all certified using the formula of Sabine. The long-awaited opening of the Boston Symphony Hall took place on the 15th of October, 1900. After an initial number of mixed reviews, the hall was soon trumpeted as one of the best spaces to hear live music in America. In fact, the Boston Symphony Herald declared the sound in the hall a veritable, quote, feat in acoustics, further noting that, quote, everything is heard with the most perfect distinctiveness. The contrasting timbres of the different instruments stand out clearly, and at no time, even in the heaviest fortissimos, is there any cloudiness of tone. After Symphony Hall enjoyed thousands of performances and endured the many cultural shifts of the early 20th century, members of the executive board in 1946, a memorial plaque was placed, and it read, "The first auditorium in the world to be built in known conformity with acoustical laws was designed in accordance with Sabine's specifications and mathematical formulae, the fruits of long and arduous research through self-effacing devotion to science. Here stands his monument." Thus, with the building of this hall, science made its distinctive mark on the sound of live music in America. It is interesting to note that the frequency used to measure the sound absorption coefficient in Sabine's formula, and as used in the acoustical design of Symphony Hall, namely 512 hertz, is the same tone used in inner ear research today, made famous by 19th century physiologists Heinrich Riener and Ernst Weber. The Riener test and the Weber test are both used today to assess a patient's hearing by placing a 512 hertz tuning fork on the side of the ear to measure conductive hearing loss, as you see here, or on top of the head to measure middle ear hearing loss, respectively. And here, I have the pleasure of an actual tuning fork set at 512 hertz, used in testing one's hearing, but also used in Sabine's formula. So this very tone was used not only fixing the formula, but also in the creation of this space. According to the National Center for Biotechnical Information, 512 hertz provides, quote, the best balance of tone decay and tactile vibration, allowing for a greater precision of sound detection by the patient. With this connection to medical science and balanced human hearing, we now understand that the interior sonic environment of Symphony Hall went well beyond simply creating a performance space to hear canonic works of the past. The hall itself was a scientifically defined auditory device that established a healthy listening environment on proper oral balance. Such efforts to create a space to hear preferred sounds that were isolated from the outside world was a constant trope in acoustic research throughout the first decades of the 20th century. As evidenced by a 1919 article in the Journal of the American Institute of Architects written by Clifford Swan, the same one as referred to earlier, a student of Sabine, and who helped create the acoustics of this hall, noise within the everyday listening environment became a prime motivator for acousticians, especially as they approached concert hall construction. And as you notice in the quote here, he seems to refer to the noise experienced in everyday business offices in the early 20th century to the cacophony of a coal-driven factory. Thus, to define a listening space away from the sounds of the modern world, acousticians and builders of concert halls in the early 20th century retreated to a classic pre-industrial time which bathed the listener in an alternate reality. For example, one notes that Symphony Hall was constructed with an aesthetic eye to the past, with its classic columns and rectangular shape, which recalls an ancient Greek or Roman temple. But beyond appearances, the sound of the concert hall in the early 20th century also sought to return to the past as well. According to the first edition of Acoustics of Buildings, published in 1923 by Floyd Watson, who later founded the Acoustic Society of America in 1928, the ideal auditorium acoustics for both voice and music in a time of increased urban activity was modeled after an ancient outside space, sort of an ancient Greek theater, an outdoor auditorium. As Watson makes plain in the book's introduction and throughout the text, the acoustical environment of an ideal music auditorium in the early 20th century was a sound space that eliminated excessive echoes and the blurring of sound. His model being a flat, open-air location, such as an open field, where there is seemingly no impediment between the listener and the sound source, beyond wind conditions, air temperature, and humidity. In order to translate such a listening environment to the concert hall, noise abatement materials were applied to the space, such as plaster, wood, cork, carpeting, curtains, upholstered seats, cloth panels, and coffered ceiling, all of which were in proportion to Sabine's formula to lessen sound reverberation in the room. And as one notes from this slide, you see, this is directly from Floyd Watson's book, Acoustics of Building. Here you see the volume of a theater and also the time of reverberation in seconds of a sound of a hall that has no audience, a 30 audience, and maximum audience. And you notice that these halls here, built in 1921 and also 1919, you have the Kilburn Hall, as well as, can't really see it from here, but the Smith Concert Hall, as well as the Orchestra Hall in Detroit, all so around the seconds, about 1.67 seconds in terms of reverberation time, in terms of a maximum audience, as compared to the Boston Symphony Hall and Leipzig Gewandhaus. Both built, Leipzig Gewandhaus was the model for the Boston Symphony Hall, and they both have an average time of 2.2 seconds. So basically indicating the reverberation time before World War I was much longer than it was after. Given the increase of noise in the everyday listening environment, one can thus conclude that a more deadened sound space was preferred in concert hall construction in the early 20th century, allowing for a more intimate, enclosed listening experience with the live sound source, an oral reality that has haunted music performance sites ever since. Beyond the concert hall, the war effort in the United States further imposed a heightened acoustic reality upon the everyday lives of its citizens. During the war, the use of trench warfare eliminated the line of sight, forcing one to use acoustical theories on a battlefield in order to locate the enemy, especially with the prolific use of U-boats and aerial bombardment. Unlike any other time in the history of war, soldiers were faced with hearing their enemy rather than seeing them, a phenomenon that the cultural historian Axel Vollmer describes as an auscultation of the acoustic warscape. Additionally, the extreme levels of volume emanating from land and naval artillery created an acoustic landscape that constituted a violent, inhospitable environment that dramatically defined a desire to control unwanted sounds like no other. Although the fight against noise in American cities began before World War I, the physical and neurological effects of the acoustic warscape on American soldiers, for example, PTSD or shell shock syndrome, the early 20th century term that alludes to the damaging effects of repeated loud percussive sounds in a battlefield, increased the need for better sound control measures within the built environment back at home. The study of acoustics in America then became less about controlling the flow of sound and more about isolating individuals from it. In addition, the steady use of arc lamps and incandescent light bulbs throughout the day and night brought with them an increase in street traffic, factory work, and general human activity in urban centers. Such activity was first registered by the public as decreasing the surrounding property value and then later as causing physical and mental health problems due to the damaging effects of constant city noise. All of which became a topic for legislators in Europe and the United States, where debates about noise grew alongside a deepening sense of unease about the future of civilization around the turn of the 20th century, as ceaseless technological and cultural development was now seen to pose a technical and physical threat to health. This medically defined critique of modernity encouraged local governments to pass noise abatement laws and form anti-noise leagues, as you see here on the slide, in order to counteract the rise in nervous anxiety, hearing loss, and mental illness diagnosed in urban communities. And further still, and perhaps by consequence, big band jazz and talkies of the so-called Roaring 20s were at the time characterized by academics and conservative music lovers alike as a noise-filled blight upon the sensibilities of all art-loving Americans. Here you see in the slide of one of the more famous jazz groups in America at the time, Duke Ellington's 14-member jazz band of 1932, as well as a movie poster for the first feature-length film with synchronized music and speech, the 1927 film, The Jazz Singer. The film was an instant hit with American audiences, where some critics even noted a kind of hysteria among the patrons who heard it for the first time, calling it a, quote, sensation. The critical reports from the film are not unlike those concerning jazz music in general, which speaks to why Hollywood would choose such a subject to premiere the advent of sound in cinema. For example, after listening to the jazz-influenced music of George Gershwin at Aeolian Hall on the 12th of February, 1924, a critic published the following remark in Musical America, an established journal of American musical conservatism and pedagogy. He wrote, "Jazz expresses merely the easy joy, vulgarity, and love of motion characteristic of America's big cities." To many conservative music listeners, the sound of jazz and its dogmatism of the commonplace presented a threat to those who championed an artistic legacy for America that rivaled Europe. Like the everyday noises of the modern world, jazz was viewed by many social critics as a danger to the health and well-being of the American listener. Conversely, it was the sound of American jazz that, following the devastation of World War I, revitalized the European modernist spirit, with pieces such as Igor Stravinsky's 1918 The Soldier's Tale, Kurt Weill's Three-Penny Opera of 1928, or Darius Milhaud's 1923 surrealistic jazz piece La Création du Monde. For Europeans, American jazz was a celebrated byproduct of the early 20th century aesthetic for progress, dynamic energy, hybridity, and spectacle, which was a problem for individuals who desired to escape from such modernist sounds as they retreated to the art, music, and genres of the past. Which brings us to the Coolidge Auditorium. The Coolidge Auditorium was designed to host classical chamber music and to serve as a counterpoint to the sounds of populist entertainment, thus removed, quote, from the sphere of social rivalry and commercial intrigue. In a program booklet for an inaugural set of 3 chamber music concerts in 1924 at the Freer Gallery of Art here in Washington, D.C., the chief of the music division of the Library of Congress, Carl Engel, characterized the importance of chamber music to the American public. He characterized it as a genre like no other, the head of musical composition and performance, as you see here in the quote, using Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven as exemplars of this style of music, and this is the chief of all music. As a space specifically dedicated to chamber music, inaugurated at the start of the jazz era, the Coolidge Auditorium and its supporters were not alone in their desire to reform American cultural tastes with a return to artistic genres of the past. The size and intimacy of the Coolidge Auditorium expressed the values of the so-called Little Theater movement in America, which began before the start of World War I and ended in the mid-1930s. Advocates of the movement, who were drawn primarily from the upper middle class, desired intimate theatrical spaces, stripped of the spectacle and sentimentality found in movie houses in order to create, quote, an image of reform, struggling against a conservative corporate society. Hollywood films and formulaic stage spectacles were perceived as enemies of high art and were described by members of the movement as, quote, mindless, bloated, and detrimental to psychic well-being. The Little Theater movement's architectural response was to construct and promote small playhouses and unconventional theatrical spaces for the performance of experimental and classic revivals of European works. The promotion of such theaters were grounded in moralistic terms and in the spirit of reform and the revitalization of the fine arts in America. A prime example from the time is the Helen Hayes Theater in New York City, built in 1912 by the New York theater director and producer Winthrop Ames, but pictured here in 1920 with the insertion of a new balcony. The goal of the theater was to, quote, be a place of entertainment for intelligent people. With its neo-Georgian architecture that recalled the chamber halls of Europe rather than the big-budget theaters of Broadway, such as the Ziegfeld Theater, as you see here on 54th Street in New York, during the initial run of Showboat in 1927. The Little Theater movement and its ally, the Coolidge Auditorium, was one of many national reform projects in the early 20th century that sought political and social change in the so-called progressive era. Be it the prohibition of alcohol, the granting of voting rights to women, laws to protect labor unions, or education reform, the era presented a call to arms for the elimination of waste and corruption in all areas of society. At the heart of all these reforms was a hope for a prosperous society for all, a collective vision for the country to be greater than it was in the past. Even the wealthiest in society took up the call, increasing philanthropic activity by creating public spaces to educate and enrich the masses. Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, pictured here, was one such individual who dedicated much of her fortune, made by her father in the wholesale grocery business in Chicago, to reform music in America. Her love of music, especially chamber music, came from many years of piano performance and studying composition. In fact, one of her pieces, Thy Soul Hath Snatched Up Thine, an art song you will hear later tonight at the concert. When her father died, Elizabeth's first philanthropic act was to establish a pension fund in his honor for musicians of the Chicago Symphony. This interest in supporting music for the enjoyment of others led to the building of Sprague Music Hall at Yale University, her father's alma mater, the establishment of music ensembles, and the creation of the Berkshire Chamber Music Festival in Massachusetts, complete with residences for musicians and a 440-seat festival hall. 1925 marked the 8th anniversary of the festival, annually held since 1918, and the opening of this space, the Coolidge Auditorium. This auditorium would become the capstone of Coolidge's philanthropic support of chamber music in America. Frustrated by the lack of suitable space to hear chamber music in the nation's capital, Coolidge approached Carl Engel, the chief of the music division at the Library of Congress and a close friend, and explained to him her desire to have a music auditorium in the library. Engel later introduced Coolidge to Herbert Putnam, the Librarian of Congress. In November of 1924, in order to begin construction of the hall, Miss Coolidge presented Putnam with a personal check, as you see here, for $60,000, which is equivalent to the purchase power of a little over $1 million today. By January, Putnam met with the architect of the Capitol, David Lynn, who suggested that Charles Platt serve as an architectural consultant in the design. Charles Adams Platt was the architect of record for the Smithsonian Institution's Freer Gallery of Art, pictured here, where Putnam, Engel, and Coolidge all saw and heard a chamber music the year before. You saw that quote from Carl Engel it was referring to a concert series in that space. Trained in both New York and Paris, Platt was a favored landscape architect and garden designer for the family estates of Rockefeller, Astor, Roosevelt, and even the gardens of the Sprague home in Brookline, Massachusetts. Given his fluency with European artistic traditions and American idealist architecture, Platt seemed well suited to fulfill Coolidge's vision for the auditorium. Initially, Platt designed a thrust stage with seats on 3 of the 4 sides. According to Engel's letter to Coolidge, Swan, the acoustician, advised against such a design for the auditorium, his reasoning being that, quote, such a stage would tend to create one limited area where the acoustics would be excellent and all the rest of the hall would have to suffer. Swan thus recommended that Platt design a rectangular-shaped theater, similar to his mentor's own architectural design for the Boston Symphony Hall, with a seating capacity of 512 to properly accommodate an evenness of sound to every seat. To calculate the acoustic properties of the space, Swan, similar to Sabine, used a pitch above middle C to measure the reverberation time as various materials were added to the empty hall. Although there's no evidence in the correspondence between Swan and Platt to match the resident pitch frequency of 512 hertz to the 512 seats in the hall, nonetheless, the correlation suggests that the Coolidge Auditorium was designed to be a therapeutic listening environment during a time when noise was viewed collectively as a public health crisis. To mitigate sound leakage into the library, the space was equipped with slow-moving heavy double doors with 1 inch of wool felt encased in leather. You came through those as you entered the hall. The felt created a light, tight closure around each door that was enhanced with a lever door handle, which, when depressed, would push a felt stop down in between the doors so as to seal the space between them. In addition, the reinforced concrete floor in between the doors, the reinforced concrete floor was covered with cork tile to reduce the amount of airborne noise that travels through lateral walls and floors. In a further attempt to control echoes and excessive reverberation, the ceiling was coffered with ventilation grills were installed near the front of the stage, as you see on the right and left, and also in the image. The walls were lined with 1 inch thick wool felt and covered with painted cloth panels so as to absorb the sound even further. And finally, to bring about a neoclassic aesthetic to the hall, oak-paneled wainscoting was put in place throughout. As listed in the paper's Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge Foundation collection, the wainscoting and the hall was meant to mimic, quote, the Little Theater in New York City, a reference once again to the Helen Hayes Theater in New York. The Coolidge Auditorium was thus designed to be a classically inspired listening environment, equipped with enough sound control measures to create a dead acoustic space, meaning a space with a low prolongation of sound resonance. The hall was acoustically designed to have a time of reverberation of 1.4 seconds at full capacity, which is in line with other acoustically designed spaces in the 1920s, a time once again when there was a rational fear of noise. The Coolidge Auditorium opened on the 28th of October, 1925, the start of a 3-day festival of chamber music, 97 years ago today. The festival culminated on October 30th, Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge's birthday, which was established then and is still known today as Founders Day. The 3-day festival featured music from the Renaissance, Baroque, and classical periods, as well as contemporary works based on traditional compositional forms and genres. And you see here, this is the program of music from the 3-day festival. As you see, Bach and Handel, also composers of the early 20th century, but writing pieces that are very much within the style of the earlier period. Especially, you see on the second day motets coming from the Renaissance, as well as pieces, string quartets. The festival repertoire exemplified a desire to return to the past, to do it in a space that literally shut itself off from the noise of the modern world. In contrast to the large theaters and movie houses that were populating cities across America, the Coolidge Auditorium presented an intimate, unamplified sonic experience for both listener and musician. Thus, the highly controlled acoustics, the neoclassical architecture design of a federal building in the nation's capital, and the select repertoire all represented a cohesive effort to institutionalize chamber music in America. The new hall and the three-day music festival were well received by the press, with one reviewer remarking, quote, "Although the architecture and decorations of the hall is severely simple in design, the acoustics, which are said to be perfect, compensate for the entire lack of ornament." After the successful opening of the hall, Coolidge took the unprecedented step of broadcasting chamber music on the radio, directly from the Coolidge Auditorium. From the very start of the building project, Miss Coolidge desired a space in the nation's capital that would arouse American listeners to the pleasures and collective sounds of chamber music, hence one of the reasons why the Library of Congress was chosen. The relatively new practice of radio listening in the home allowed this to occur on a scale that was previously unimaginable, connecting remote regions of the country with a singular sonic identity of civilization and culture. The success of these live radio broadcasts, hosted by Miss Coolidge herself, prompted the Library of Congress to initiate the Chamber Music Hour, which was presented on major radio stations across America. With the radio transmissions from the Coolidge Auditorium, members of Coolidge's artistic circle could carve out a, quote, restorative sound culture in opposition to the chaotic noise of the day. In 1936, after 10 years of broadcasts from the auditorium, Miss Coolidge presented the following self-congratulatory remark. And here I just have to read it because it's wonderful. "To NBC, I cordially say, I told you so. The splendid victory for chamber music over those doubts and misgivings of broadcasting it to the largest audience possible, and by doing this freely and frequently until we cannot live without it, thus serving art through mankind by serving mankind through art." The acoustic reality that Swan and Platt set out to achieve by building the Coolidge Auditorium, specifically for listeners within the hall to hear live chamber music, was ultimately redefined by the radio listening audience that was so sought by Miss Coolidge to reform music in America. After serving the chamber music community for over 70 years with its original acoustic construction, which commissioned and premiered some of the most revered works in the first half of the 20th century, such as Stravinsky's Apollon Mossaget in 1928 and Aaron Copland's Appalachian Spring in 1944, as well as performances by Leontyne Price, Leonard Bernstein, Arthur Rubinstein, and nearly every major chamber music ensemble in the United States and Europe. The Coolidge Auditorium was renovated in 1996 and 1997. The Library of Congress contracted famed acoustician George C. Isner, as you see here, to serve as consultant for the renovation project. Isner was a pioneer in technical theater design who helped bring automation to stagecraft and invented the Isner system, electronic dimming system for stage lighting. Following Isner's advice, the hall was equipped with movable acoustic panels in the stage shell, an acoustic curtain to simulate a full hall for recording sessions, and a new audiovisual recording and projection system. In the end, the increasing demand by the public that the Coolidge Auditorium be equipped to accommodate radio broadcasting and electronic recording meant that its original acoustical construction was reconfigured to meet contemporary listening demands, influenced as they were from music received outside the hall. As Emily Thompson writes in her award-winning study, The Soundscape of Modernity, at the same time that the Coolidge Auditorium was being built to counteract noise within American society and to generate a heightened artistic culture centered on chamber music, a new acoustic reality began to take shape in America, whereby acousticians sought to develop an ideal soundscape for a mass audience outside the built environment of the hall that mirrored recording technology such as a phonograph horn that spans out to the audience. And here you see the quote from Emily Thompson's book, which basically argues that this idea that these halls are now constructed to represent the very recording technology. As before, it was just simply an echo of a live performance. Now the live performance, as you see in these concert halls, now are defined by the recording technology itself, shaped like a phonograph horn. With the advent of radio broadcasting, the sound engineer superseded the acoustician by using loudspeakers in conjunction with or even independent of architectural space. The soundscape of the concert hall was now more defined by the outside radio listener than the live listening audience. And as live music became louder, electronically produced, and more percussive throughout the 20th century, the closed, deadened acoustic space of the early 20th century, exemplified by the Coolidge Auditorium, became inadequate to allow for such music to swell, mix, and develop in the hall. In response, the acoustics of the concert hall began to reflect less an ideal pre-modern space and more the amplified sonic reality of contemporary society. The parameters of Sabine's formula, defined by the natural hearing ability of the human ear, was therefore replaced with a microphone that automatically triggered a recording chronograph to register the instant at which the received sound signal had decreased by 60 decibels. That's about the sound level of a conversation. The sound that activated the recording chronograph was no longer a pipe organ, but an electronically driven oscillator, whose pure signal was amplified and then projected from a loudspeaker. This change to the parameters of calculating the sound resonance in a room forced Sabine's acoustic formula to change. As you see here, where even you see the 60 decibels in terms of reverberation time, but other aspects, logarithms and so forth, being changed in terms of the formula. This formula was developed in 1930 by Carl Eyring, a physicist at Brigham Young University and a researcher at Bell Telephone Laboratories, which itself was founded in 1925, the same year of the opening of the Coolidge Auditorium. With this new formula, the behavior of sound in the modern world, which was being increasingly produced by loudspeakers on a soundstage, can now be attenuated to fit the medium. Armed with this new formula and equipped with an electroacoustical ear, so to speak, to determine the reverberation time within an enclosed space, architects placed loudspeakers into concert halls to fill every nook and cranny in order to guarantee an efficient, focused sound to the audience. With such a blast of sound coming from the stage and throughout the hall, acoustical construction began to reflect less the design of a rectangle and more that of a fan opening up to the audience, what architectural historian Michael Forsyth calls hi-fi concert halls. The ultimate culmination of this style of architecture premiered in 1932 with the opening of New York City's Radio City Music Hall, performance space that was acoustically designed for acousmatic listening, or listening via electronically reproduced means. The main auditorium boasted over 6,000 seats, the world's largest at the time, with the latest hardware and electroacoustic reproduction, which were encased in the most advanced sound-absorbing material on the market. Here, in this gigantic cathedral of sound, music and the recorded voice became a medium to be heard and enjoyed outside the hall, in spite of the listening environment within the hall. From the building of Radio City Music Hall to today, the steady insertion of recording and amplified technology in the concert hall, as well as society in general, has transformed how we hear live music. The rectangular shape of concert halls, which was celebrated from the 19th century on for its aesthetic connection to the past, became inadequate given the increase of recorded sound in a live listening environment. If one surveys the architectural designs of mid-20th to early 21st century concert halls, the time when acousmatic music became more pronounced in society, one notes a great diversity in size and shape, which all highlight more often than not the unique design talents of a world-renowned architect and the cultural hubris of a wealthy city or state government. Furthermore, designs of these performance spaces frequently reflect organic shapes rather than still plain figures such as a box or rectangle. It is somewhat ironic that in the pursuit to design concert halls that reflect organic shapes in nature, the acoustics inside the hall have to go beyond nature in order to even out the live sound, whereby stereophonic amplifiers and digital acoustic reflectors curate the live soundscape for the listener. As the audience sitting area continually spreads out from the stage into various spaces that lie behind, above, and below the stage, the acoustical design has to work harder and become more technically invasive in shaping our live music listening. To be clear, this is an ideal sound space, owing to the fact that in our everyday listening, when we hear a sound, Our ears define the distance, direction, and medium of a sound producer. Thus, when we hear a sound coming from the left, the sound will give rise to a positive intensity difference between the left ear and the right ear, the so-called shadow effect. Present-day concert hall acoustics then are in fact going beyond the natural experience of hearing sounds by creating a false world, a 360-degree total absorption of enhanced multi-directional sounds. This is the same as what one hears in headphones or stereophonic loudspeakers, which promise the listener a scientifically exact purity of sound due to the visual or mechanical presence of the audio technology. In such a listening space, the real sound of the music and the digitally enhanced sound of the hall are indistinguishable. This so-called hi-fi culture celebrates an aesthetic of audio realism, sonic immersion, and mental transportation to manifest an illusion of presence, ideally indistinguishable from the live real thing. And combined with the biomorphic designs of the hall, the audience is no longer simply listening to live sounds of a music performance, but rather experiencing the psychoacoustics of the hall, a visually heightened reality that masks the predetermined sonic environment. In his essay, The Grain of the Voice, the French literary theorist Roland Barthes reminds us that the grain, the actual body of the performer, or in our case, the performance space, is a text full of erotic meaning for the listener. By eliminating the spatiality and corporality of the sound, we are disregarding fundamental aspects of the sound inherent in its production. In fact, the MP3 digital audio format, the most pervasive music file format played on digital audio devices today for the average listener, has eliminated the actual physical presence of the music to such a degree that certain audio layers of the original sound signal, which imprint the uniqueness of the built environment onto the sound, no longer are heard. For what remains is a curated sonic reality, a virtual presence that is native only to the digital medium itself. Due to this proliferation of digital audio files, compressed audio, which discards sounds that are low in volume, high in pitch, and close in time to other sounds, now defines the sonic reality of not only recorded music, but also live music as well. Modern acousticians have embraced this paradigm shift to such a degree that lossy compression is now modeled in concert hall construction today. And here you see the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg, Germany, where I've done some of my research on acoustics and concert hall design. This is a 110 model of the actual hall that was used by Nagata Acoustics, who built the acoustic construction of this hall. And what they've created on the stage was a 12-sided speaker sound system that they played an MP3 from. And then each of the seats here, populated with white faces and black and gray outfits, put microphones in them to try to define the sound experience from those seats. And so everything defined digitally and also through this compressed sound. So the use of compressed audio in the model to curate the acoustics of the hall speaks directly to my point of how recording technology is used to model the live listening environment in concert hall construction today. As I've discussed throughout my talk, the main goal in architectural acoustics is to create a sonic environment in which preferred sounds are enhanced while others are absorbed, blocked, or otherwise eliminated from the space as soon as they are produced. What has changed in concert hall acoustical construction today is the use of compressed sound, that is to say, the digital audio recording format, to shape the listening environment of the hall. So much so that the unique timbre of the live sounding body, be it the performer or the space itself, is eliminated so as to produce a sound in the hall that is akin to a music recording. The sonic ideal of what a music performance should sound like for headphones, for many contemporary listeners who often prefer their music in a listening environment made for headphones and earbuds. This process of scrubbing the hall of its corporality, its human presence, creates a sameness of sound that distances the uniqueness of the sounding space and the performer from the uniqueness of the music, a point echoed in a Los Angeles Times article from music critic Mark Sweat in 2017, where he laments the sameness of sound across the globe designed by the famed acoustician Yasuhisa Toyota. From his first project with Tokyo Suntory Hall in 1986 to the Walt Disney Hall in Los Angeles in 2003 to the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg in 2017, Toyota has come to define how we hear or how we should hear classical music. What Toyota has created is a packaged experience that flattens the uniqueness of the concert hall's location, performer, composer, or even the listener's own listening preferences to create a uniformed ideal that has convinced us of its own uniqueness of pure acoustics, verified by the rigors of applied science. As Jacques Attali, the French economic and cultural theorist, argued in his 1977 classic text, Noise, The Political Economy of Music, when music listening is defined by uniform conditions, these conditions become, quote, a powerful factor in centralization, cultural normalization, and the disappearance of distinctive cultures. Thus, when expanded to drama stages, movie theaters, lecture halls, churches, exhibition spaces, and sports arenas, one begins to see how far and the large reach and flattening effect of the sound recording has come to define our listening in general. Concert hall acoustic design today has little to do with foregrounding the site-specific characteristics of music production, for example, the complexity of timbre, resonance, pitch range, and dynamics, and more to do with the predictive modeling of sound found in the newest audio-digital formats, such as FLAC or ALAC digital formats. To this end, one of the most commonly used acoustic software programs for concert hall design is Computer-Aided Technique Acoustic Software, or CAT, acoustic for short. As you see here, a 3D computer modeling program for acoustic prediction and sound field simulation. The computer program can be used in the actual space, virtual space, or through miniature models of the hall, as we saw in the video clip earlier as a model of the Elbphilharmonie. Tools such as CAT Acoustic contribute to defining an all-purpose soundscape, which neither highlight the uniqueness of particular pieces of music and the performers, nor the distinctive sound of particular auditoriums. Like the recording studio and noise-canceling headphones, the acoustic reality of the contemporary concert hall flattens our perception of diverse bodies of sound. To conclude, the unique listening environment of live chamber music, with its intimacy of space and performer, was conserved in America with the building of the Coolidge Auditorium at the Library of Congress in 1925. The Coolidge Auditorium evolved from a heightened awareness of sound society, the philanthropic will for collective reform, and the progressive mechanization of a modern American life. The marriage of all these elements influenced the auditorium's construction and acoustical design. The focus of listeners and the wider public, however, soon shifted to the futuristic sound of radio transmission. This gave rise to the creation of new types of concert halls, such as Radio City Music Hall in 1932, which privileged predictable electroacoustical recording and technology over the spatial peculiarities of a live music performance. The legacy of recorded music continues to influence concert hall design and listener expectations of how music should sound, regardless of the unique particulars that define an acoustic space. And as we've seen, outperformed the seemingly progressive agenda of music reform in early 20th century America and the medical critique of noise. In addition, as I've discussed in my talk, contemporary concert hall construction curates the live soundscape in the listening space to such a degree that the acoustics are made to reflect what one hears in a digital recording, whereby certain frequencies are eliminated and others highlighted in order to present a balanced, patented sound. Owing to its ability to be heard anywhere via a mobile device and at any time by anyone, digital music listening remains a self-directed, insular activity whereby people and the sounding objects outside the listener are canceled in favor of one's own preferred sounds. To honor the individual consumer then, and to ensure the viability of the concert hall as a reliable space to hear live music, the inclusive listening environment of the concert hall is, as a result, highly monetized, regularized, and rarefied for consumption. The listening behavior of the audience is thus tightly controlled. One cannot speak, must silence all electronic devices, ironically, is discouraged from clapping in between musical pauses, cannot cough, cannot move when the music begins, and in essence, mute all aspects of one's corporal self in order to hear the live music in the hall. The music we hear in the acoustically heightened and pre-manufactured listening environment of concert halls today remain the legacy of society wanting to go beyond the everyday in order to embrace assimilated, virtual, enhanced, and distant reality. In such a hyper-reality, live music and acousmatic music are seemingly blended in the concert hall so that there is no clear distinction between where one ends and the other begins. The Italian philosopher and cultural writer Umberto Eco referred to such a state of affairs as the authentic fake, which is born out of the inability to distinguish reality from a simulation of reality. In the case of contemporary concert halls, such as the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg, with the introduction of acousmatic music systems in live music listening, in the live listening environment, one questions what happens when live music is no longer reflective of the actual sound source, but something more or even less, a filtered reality that convinces us to give up on our natural ability to see and hear the truth around us. In this instance, then, one starts to understand that even the concert hall, a space initially conceived as separate from the everyday listening environment, a protected space for the noise of conflict and disorder, resounds with the same cultural forces shaping our world today. Thank you.